He said, "My ex will be joining us for Christmas." I smiled, because I had a surprise, too. But that smile, the one I plastered on my face the moment those words left my husband's lips, felt like it was made of cracked porcelain. If you tapped it with a spoon, it would have shattered into 1,000 tiny, sharp pieces all over our pristine kitchen floor. I was standing at the island, kneading dough for the cinnamon rolls my son, Leo, loves so much, my hands covered in flour, and for a second, I thought I must have misheard him. The words just hung there in the air between us, mixing with the scent of pine from the tree in the next room and the warm, yeasty smell of the dough. Mark was leaning against the doorway, his phone still in his hand, as if he'd just gotten off the call and had to deliver the news immediately, like ripping off a Band-Aid. His expression was a careful, practiced neutral, the one he uses for difficult business negotiations. And in that moment, I felt like I was a business negotiation, a problem to be managed. My heart did this funny little stutter step, a syncopated rhythm against my ribs. "Clara?" I asked, my voice unnaturally calm, my hands still working the dough, push, fold, turn. "Clara is coming here? For Christmas?" Clara, the ex-wife, the brilliant, sharp, perpetually put-together architect who had shared the first 15 years of Mark's life. The one who left him, not the other way around, for a career opportunity a continent away. The ghost who still lingered in the background of our marriage, not because Mark was still in love with her, but because her shadow was so long, so impressive. She was a skyscraper, and I felt, most days, like a quaint, slightly crooked little cottage. "She's all alone this year, Sarah," Mark said, his voice softening with that tone he uses when he's trying to sell me on something he knows I won't like. "The project in Singapore fell through, and she's just flown back. She has nowhere to go, it's Christmas, I couldn't just say no." Push, fold, turn. I focused on the texture of the dough, the way it yielded under my palms. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for the explosion, the tears, the quiet resentment he'd learned to navigate over our 7 years together. But this time, something different rose up in me. Not anger, not quite. It was a cold, sharp clarity. You see, his announcement, his world-altering statement, had landed right on top of my own secret. A secret I had been cradling close to my heart for 2 weeks. A tiny, glowing ember of joy I was planning to reveal on Christmas morning. A surprise that was going to change everything. I looked up from the dough, and I gave him that smile, the one that didn't reach my eyes. "Of course," I said, my voice light, almost breezy. "The more the merrier. We have plenty of room." Our house, the one Mark and Clara had bought together at the height of their dual architect success, always felt a little too big for just the three of us. Me, Mark, and our 5-year-old Leo. It was Clara's design. All sharp angles, glass walls, and minimalist aesthetics. My touches, the cozy blankets, the potted herbs on the windowsill, the small, messy art projects stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, always felt like temporary decorations in a museum. And now the original curator was returning. Mark looked visibly relieved, his shoulders dropping an inch. "I knew you'd understand. You're amazing, you know that." He crossed the room and kissed my forehead, his lips cool. He smelled like cold winter air and his familiar cologne. I kept smiling until he left the kitchen, his footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. The moment he was gone, my hands stilled. The ember of my secret glowed a little brighter, a little fiercer. He thought he had dropped a bombshell. He had no idea that I was sitting on a nuclear reactor of my own. You see, after years of hoping, of praying, of heartbreaking negative tests, and one devastating early loss that left a hollow space inside me I thought would never fill, I was pregnant, 12 weeks along. The doctor had called me with the blood test results just 2 days prior, confirming that everything was perfect, that this little one was holding on tight. I had the grainy ultrasound photo tucked inside my recipe book, the one that had been my own mother's. I'd been planning the perfect reveal. A tiny stocking hung next to Leo's, a onesie that said, "Merry Christmas to all and to all a good night," wrapped under the tree. It was going to be the moment that sealed our family, that solidified this new life we had built from the ashes of his old one. And now, Clara was coming. Clara, who had never wanted children. Clara, who had told Mark in one of their early arguments, he'd once confessed to me, that she found the idea of pregnancy biologically primitive and motherhood a creative dead end. Her presence in this house, in this holiday that was supposed to be about our family's future, felt like a cruel joke. It felt like the universe was testing me, seeing if I was strong enough to hold on to my joy, even when the ghost of the woman I could never be came to sit at my dinner table. So I smiled. I smiled because what else could I do? I couldn't tell him about the baby yet, not like this. Not when his focus was on comforting his lonely ex-wife. My surprise couldn't be a reaction to his. It had to stand on its own. It had to be the main event, not the counterpunch. I finished kneading the dough, set it in a buttered bowl to rise, and covered it with a clean cloth. I wiped my floury hands on my apron and walked to the large glass window that looked out onto our backyard. The sky was a flat, heavy gray, promising snow. Leo's little red sled was propped against the fence. This was my life. My son, my husband, the new life growing inside me. This was my home. And if Clara was coming for Christmas, then she would see that. She would see a family, a real, messy, loving family, not the sterile, perfect partnership she and Mark had shared, but something alive and warm and resilient. I placed my hand on my still flat stomach, a secret gesture of solidarity. "Don't you worry, little one," I whispered to the quiet, to the snow-threatening sky. "Mommy has a plan. This is going to be a Christmas no one will ever forget." The smile on my face finally felt real, a small, private, and fiercely protective curve of my lips. It was no longer the smile of a wounded wife, but the smile of a mother, a lioness, guarding her den. The game had just changed, and Mark had no idea he was even playing. The next few days were a study in quiet domestic warfare. I didn't prepare for Clara's arrival with anxiety, but with a kind of fierce, nesting determination. I took Leo to the store with me, and we bought the plumpest, freshest turkey I could find. We picked out a new, incredibly soft throw blanket for the living room couch, in a deep ruby red, a color Clara would never have chosen. I baked. I baked like a woman possessed. The house, usually an echo of Clara's cool minimalism, began to smell of gingerbread and sugar cookies, of simmering cranberry sauce and the rich, earthy scent of the fir tree we decorated with all of Leo's lopsided, glitter-covered creations. I was reclaiming the territory, not with words, but with scent and texture and the undeniable, beautiful clutter of family life. Mark watched it all with a sort of bewildered gratitude. He'd expected tension, a cold shoulder, and instead he got a whirlwind of domesticity. He'd pull me into a hug, nuzzle my neck, and say, "You're being so wonderful about this, Sarah. I don't deserve you." And I just smile that same secret smile and hand him a cookie still warm from the oven. He thought my goodness was for him, a gift of my understanding nature. He didn't realize it was armor, forged in the quiet fire of my secret. The day before Christmas Eve, the doorbell rang. Leo, a whirlwind of 5-year-old energy, shot past me to answer it. But I got there first, my heart doing that nervous flutter again. I took a deep breath, smoothed my sweater over my stomach, a new unconscious habit, and opened the door. And there she was, Clara. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine for a ski holiday in the Alps. She was wearing a tailored cream-colored coat, her dark hair sleek and sharp against her jawline, not a single strand out of place. She carried a single, expensive-looking leather suitcase. She looked untouchable. And then her eyes landed on me, and I saw it. The quick, assessing glance, taking in my messy bun, my flour-dusted jeans, my warm, lived-in wool socks. It was a look that had always made me feel frumpy and unkempt, but today it just made me feel real. "Sarah," she said, her voice a cool, smooth alto. "Thank you for having me. This is unexpectedly kind of you." "Of course, Clara. It's Christmas. Come in, it's freezing." I stepped aside and she glided in, her perfume a subtle, expensive cloud of sandalwood and citrus that immediately began a silent war with my gingerbread. Leo peeked out from behind my legs, suddenly shy. "Hello, Leo," she said, her tone softening just a fraction. She bent down, which seemed like an unnatural movement for her. "My, you've gotten so big." "I'm 5, he announced, holding up a full hand of fingers. "So I see," she said, and for a fleeting second, I saw something in her eyes. Not warmth exactly, but a flicker of curiosity. It was gone as quickly as it came. Mark appeared then, coming down the stairs, and the dynamic shifted instantly. It was like watching a magnet find its pole. They didn't hug, just a brief, awkward touch on the arm, a meeting of eyes that held a universe of shared history from which I was permanently excluded. "Clara, you made it." "The traffic was lighter than I anticipated," she replied, her gaze sweeping over the hallway, no doubt noticing the new mirror I'd hung, the basket of mittens and scarves by the door. I saw her eyes pause on a particularly chaotic drawing of a reindeer taped to the wall. She didn't comment. I showed her to the guest room, the one that had been her office once upon a time. It was now painted a soft sage green, with a quilt my grandmother had made. She set her suitcase down with a quiet thud. "It's very cozy," she said, and I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a critique. I decided to take it as a compliment. "I'll let you get settled. Dinner will be in about an hour." I closed the door softly behind me, leaning against it for just a moment in the hallway. The first skirmish was over. She was here. The air in my own house felt different, thinner, charged with a past I couldn't compete with. But as I walked back to the kitchen, I passed the Christmas tree, and Leo's little voice carried from the living room where he was building a fortress of cushions. I placed my hand on my stomach again, the tiny, secret lighthouse in the gathering storm. She could have her sleek coats and her sharp memories. I had this. I had the rising bread, the giggling child, the life blooming inside me. Let her come. Let her see what a real home looked like. Dinner that first night was a delicate, almost silent ballet. The clink of silverware against our wedding china was deafening. I'd made a roasted chicken with potatoes and rosemary, a simple, comforting meal, but eating it felt like a performance. Clara sat with a posture so perfect it made my back ache in sympathy. She ate in small, precise bites, her eyes occasionally drifting around the room, and I found myself seeing my home through her gaze. I noticed a small crack in the windowsill I'd never seen before, a scuff mark on the floor near Leo's chair. Mark carried the conversation, a monologue about work, about mutual acquaintances Clara and he still shared, a world of names and projects that meant nothing to me. I just nodded, pushing my food around my plate, my appetite gone. My secret, which had felt so powerful and sustaining just hours before, now felt fragile, a tiny bird I had to cup in my hands to protect from the chill she brought with her. It was Leo who finally broke the tension, as children always do. He held up a forkful of potato and announced, "Mommy says these are cloud bites because they're so fluffy." He looked at Clara, his head tilted. "Do you have a mommy?" The question hung in the air, so innocent and yet so profoundly awkward. Clara seemed momentarily thrown. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin, a slow, deliberate motion. "I did," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it all evening. "She passed away a long time ago." "Oh," Leo said, processing this. "So you don't get to have Christmas with her? That's sad." He then offered her a smile that could melt polar ice caps.
You can have some of our Christmas. We have lots." I saw her throat work as she swallowed. For a second, the perfectly composed architect was gone, and I saw just a woman, a little lonely, a little lost. "Thank you, Leo," she said, and this time the warmth in her voice sounded real. "That's very kind." After we put Leo to bed, the three of us migrated to the living room. Mark poured brandies for himself and Clara, and a glass of sparkling cider for me, which earned a raised eyebrow from Clara. "Not drinking, Sarah?" she asked, her tone lightly probing. "Just taking a break," I said smoothly, taking a sip. "I find I sleep better." I curled up on the couch, tucking my feet under me, a deliberately casual pose against her straight-backed elegance in the armchair. Mark sat between us, a literal and figurative buffer. They began talking about a building they had worked on together, early in their careers, a concert hall in the city. It was a conversation of arcs and load-bearing walls, of materials and light, a language they were both fluent in. I sat there, sipping my cider, feeling like a visitor in my own living room. I was the curator of the home, the keeper of the heart, but in this moment, I was utterly irrelevant to the intellectual symphony they were composing. I watched Mark's face animate as he talked, his hands sketching shapes in the air. This was a part of him Clara had access to, a shared passion I could never touch. My world was made of softer things, of bedtime stories and scraped knees, of knowing just how to fold the laundry so the socks all matched. Essential, but unglamorous. The silence stretched around me, thick and heavy, as their words, their laughter at some old memory, washed over me. I felt the baby move then for the first time. Not a kick, but a delicate, fluttering sensation, like a butterfly brushing against my insides. It was a reminder, a tiny, defiant signal from the future. I'm here. We're here. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I couldn't wait until Christmas morning. The balance in this house was already tilting, and I needed to plant my flag. I needed to reclaim my husband, my holiday, my story. I set my glass down on the coffee table with a soft, decisive click. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through their architectural reminiscing. They both turned to look at me, Mark with mild curiosity, Clara with that same cool, assessing gaze. I took a deep breath, my hand instinctively resting on my stomach. "Mark, we have something to tell you. To tell both of you." The room went utterly still. Mark's face shifted from curiosity to confusion, and then, as he saw the look in my eyes, to a dawning, breathtaking hope.
The look on Mark's face was everything I had dreamed it would be. His confusion melted away, replaced by a slow, widening astonishment that made his eyes shine in the soft light of the Christmas tree. His gaze dropped to my hand, still pressed against my stomach, and then flew back to my face, searching for confirmation. "Sarah?" he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I hadn't heard in years. Pure, unadulterated wonder. Are we?" I nodded, the porcelain smile finally transforming into something real, something trembling and joyful and wet with the tears I hadn't let myself cry until this very moment. "Yes," I breathed. "We are. 12 weeks. The doctor says everything is perfect." He was across the room in 2 strides, kneeling before me on the rug, his large, familiar hands coming up to cradle my face, then dropping to cover my hand on my stomach. He was laughing, a choked, happy sound, and then he was crying, pressing his forehead against mine. "A baby," he kept murmuring. "A baby. Oh, my love, my Sarah." In that moment, Clara ceased to exist. The glass house, the lingering ghost, the sharp perfume, it all faded into a blur. There was only us, this man I loved, the life we had made, and the sun sleeping soundly upstairs. It was the reclamation I had been desperately craving. When we finally pulled apart, both of us wiping our eyes and laughing shakily, we remembered her. We turned, almost in unison, to where Clara still sat in the armchair. She hadn't moved a muscle. Her face was a carefully neutral mask, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the arms of her chair.
For a long, uncomfortable moment, she said nothing. The silence was a void, sucking all the warmth out of the room. "Congratulations," she finally said, the word crisp and clean, like a sheet of ice cracking. She uncoiled herself from the chair, placing her brandy sniffer on the mantelpiece with a precise click. "That is wonderful news." She didn't look at me when she said it. Her eyes were on Mark, and in them I saw something complex and unreadable. Not jealousy, not quite, but a profound, almost painful reassessment. She was seeing him as a father again, a role she had willingly abdicated, and she was seeing the life he had built without her, a life that was now expanding, deepening, in a way she had never wanted for herself. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice regaining its cool composure. "It's been a long day. I think I'll turn in." She left the room without a backward glance, her footsteps silent on the runner in the hall. The door to the guest room closed with a soft, definitive click. Mark, still buzzing with euphoria, seemed barely to notice. He pulled me into another hug, spinning me around gently. "A baby! Leo is going to lose his mind. Oh my Sarah, this is the best Christmas gift." He was talking a mile a minute, making plans, his joy a bright, blinding light that chased all the shadows from the corners of the room. But I stood still in the circle of his arms, my cheek against his chest, listening to the steady, joyful beat of his heart. My eyes were fixed on the empty hallway. My announcement had been a victory, yes. It had shifted the tectonic plates of our little world and placed me firmly at the center of our family's narrative again. But as I replayed the look in Clara's eyes in that moment, before she masked it, I felt a strange, unexpected pang. It wasn't the sharp sting of triumphs I had anticipated. It was something quieter, sadder. I had wanted to show her my strength, my permanence. But in doing so, I think I had shown her her own emptiness. And the victory, for some reason, tasted bittersweet.
The next morning, Christmas Eve, dawned bright and cold, the world outside blanketed in a fresh, silent layer of snow. But inside the house, the atmosphere was thick and complicated. Mark's joy was a tangible, buoyant force. He kept touching me, a hand on my shoulder as he passed, a kiss on my temple as he poured coffee, his eyes constantly seeking mine with a giddy, disbelieving smile. He was living in our beautiful, sparkling future, and it was a lovely place to be. Leo, when we told him over a stack of pancakes shaped like snowmen, reacted with the chaotic, glorious energy we'd expected. "A baby?" he'd shrieked, launching himself from his chair and dancing around the kitchen. "A brother! Or a sister! I want a sister! Can I teach it to play trucks? Can it sleep in my room?" His joy was pure, uncomplicated, and it filled the kitchen with a wonderful noise. Clara entered the kitchen midway through the celebration. She was dressed in another impeccably tailored outfit, a gray cashmere sweater and black trousers, her hair once again a perfect sheet. She looked like she'd slept perfectly, but there was a new tension around her eyes, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. "Good morning," she said, her voice neutral. "Aunt Clara! Aunt Clara!" Leo yelled, rushing to her, syrup-covered hands held out. "I'm getting a sister! Mom has a baby in her tummy!" She managed a tight smile, deftly avoiding the sticky hands. "She's so hurt," she said, her eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second before looking at Mark. "That's very exciting for you all." She poured herself a cup of black coffee and leaned against the counter, a spectator to our family scene. She didn't say much, just observed, and her silence was more unnerving than any cutting remark could have been. It was as if she was studying us, a scientist, observing a strange and unfamiliar species. The plan for the day was to go ice skating at the outdoor rink in the town square, a tradition Mark and I had started when Leo was a baby. As we bundled up, a process that involved finding Leo's missing mitten, untangling scarves, and zipping up puffy coats, Clara stood by the door, pulling on a pair of elegant leather gloves. "I think I'll pass on the skating. I've never had much of a knack for it. I'll stay here, maybe read for a bit." A part of me was relieved. A morning without her watchful presence felt like a gift. But Mark, in his newfound marital bliss, wouldn't hear of it. "Nonsense, Clara. Come on, it'll be fun.
You can't hide in this house all day. It's Christmas Eve." He was being genuinely, infuriatingly kind, his happiness making him expansive, wanting to include everyone in his joy. He didn't see the slight stiffening of her shoulders, the almost imperceptible flinch. He was offering her a seat at our family table, not realizing that, for her, it was a seat in the audience, not with the players. "Really, Mark, I'm fine," she insisted, but he was already holding her coat for her, his expression so open and hopeful that to refuse would have seemed churlish. "We'll go slow," I found myself saying, surprising both her and myself. "We can hold you up." The words felt foreign in my mouth, an offering of peace from a place I didn't know I possessed. She looked from Mark's hopeful face to my tentative one, and something in her resistance broke. She gave a curt nod and slipped her arms into the coat. "All right, but I'm warning you, I'm a disaster on ice." The town square was a picture postcard scene. Snow dusted the rooftops, wreaths hung from the lampposts, and Christmas carols floated from hidden speakers. The ice rink was bustling with families, a blur of colorful jackets and laughter. We got our skates, clunky rentals for me and Mark, a pair of double-bladed ones for Leo, and a surprisingly sleek pair for Clara. Sitting on a bench, lacing up, I watched her. She was staring at the skaters with an intense concentration, as if she were memorizing their movements for a blueprint. Once on the ice, it became immediately clear she hadn't been exaggerating. The woman who commanded boardrooms and construction sites with effortless authority became utterly unmoored. Her ankles wobbled, her arms flailed, and she moved with the graceless, jerky terror of a newborn fawn. Mark, holding Leo's hand as he shuffled happily between us, laughed. "Just find your center of gravity, Clara. Relax." But she couldn't. Her body was rigid with fear. I skated a slow circle around to her, holding out my hand. "Here," I said. "Hold on to me." She looked at my outstretched hand like it was a foreign object, her pride warring with her very real fear of falling. For a long moment, I thought she would refuse, but then, with a sigh of surrender, she reached out and gripped my hand, her grasp surprisingly strong. Her skin was cold. And so we skated, a strange, mismatched pair, me, solid and steady in my worn-out skates, my other hand resting protectively on my stomach, and her clinging to me, each step a precarious negotiation with gravity. We didn't speak. The only sounds were the scrape of our blades, the distant laughter, and her sharp, indrawn breaths every time she slipped. I focused on the ice ahead, on the solid feeling of my own balance, and on the warmth of Mark and Leo's laughter as they circled us. I was holding up the woman who had always seemed so untouchable above me, and in that physical act of support, something shifted between us. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't even liking, but it was a recognition, a silent acknowledgement that we were both just women, flawed and fearful in our own ways, trying to keep our footing on a slippery surface.
After a while, her grip on my hand loosened from a panicked clutch to a steadying hold. She was still unsteady, but she was finding a rhythm, her breaths coming slower, less rugged. We completed a slow, laborious lap around the rink, a silent truce moving through the glittering cold. Mark and Leo zipped past us, Leo shrieking with delight, Mark's face flushed and happy. He gave me a thumbs up, his eyes soft with gratitude. And in that moment, I felt a surge of something so powerful, it almost stole my breath. This was my life, this messy, complicated, beautiful life, and I was its center of gravity. When we finally stepped off the ice, our blades scraping against the rubber mat, Clara let go of my hand as if it had burned her. But she didn't immediately walk away. She stood there, catching her breath, her cheeks flushed with the color that wasn't from makeup. "Thank you," she said, the words quiet but clear. She wasn't looking at me, but straight ahead at the bustling square. "I would have made a complete fool of myself without you." "It's okay," I said, bending down to help a wriggling Leo with his skate buckles. "We all need a little help staying upright sometimes." She was silent for a moment, and when I straightened up, I found her watching me, a strange, almost wistful expression on her face. "You're very good at that," she said. "At what? Skating?" "No," she said, her gaze flicked to Leo, who was now trying to eat a handful of clean snow. "At this, the mothering.
The steadying. It seems to come so naturally to you. It was the first time she had ever acknowledged anything I did as a skill, as something of value. It wasn't a compliment, not exactly. It was an observation, and it was devoid of her usual subtle condescension. She said it like she was stating a fact about the structural integrity of a beam. Before I could formulate a response, Mark came over, slinging an arm around both of us, his body radiating warmth and good cheer. "Team effort," he declared, grinning. "Who's for hot chocolate?" We found a small cafe nearby, crammed into a booth with steaming mugs. Leo, hyped up on sugar and excitement, chattered nonstop, and Mark listened with rapt attention, adding to his stories. I sat back, cradling my hot chocolate, the warmth seeping through the ceramic into my hands. Clara was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. She wasn't watching us with that analytical distance anymore. She was just listening. She watched the way Mark tucked a napkin into Leo's collar, the way he automatically reached over to wipe a smudge of chocolate from his chin. She saw the easy, unconscious rhythm of our care for him. And I saw something in her eyes finally break. Not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, quiet crumbling, like a sandcastle at the edge of the tide. On the walk back to the car, she fell into step beside me, while Mark carried a half-asleep Leo on his shoulders. The snow crunched under our boots, the festive lights twinkled around us, reflecting in the puddles of slush. "You know," she said, her voice low, meant only for me. "When Mark and I were married, we talked about children. Once." The admission hung in the frosty air between us, startling in its intimacy. We drew up pros and cons lists. We talked about the impact on our careers, on our freedom, on our 5-year plan. She gave a short, humorless laugh. My list of cons was significantly longer. I saw it as a limitation, a design flaw in an otherwise efficient partnership. I didn't know what to say. I just walked, listening, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm in my chest. "Watching you with him," she continued, her gaze fixed on Mark's broad back as he carried our son, "it doesn't look like a limitation. It looks like an expansion." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were clear, stark with an honesty that was more unsettling than any of her polished defenses. I miscalculated. Those 2 words, spoken so simply, held a universe of regret. They weren't an apology to me, not directly. They were a confession she was making to herself, and I just happened to be the witness. She had miscalculated. She had seen the blueprint for a life and misread the most important load-bearing wall. And in that moment, the last remnants of my triumphant victory over her melted away, replaced by a profound and startling sense of pity. I had won a prize she had never even wanted to win, but in the process of losing him, she had lost a version of a life she was only now, years too late, beginning to understand.
We drove home in a silence that was no longer uncomfortable, but contemplative. The world outside the car was a soft-focused painting of white and gray, and inside, we were each lost in our own thoughts. Leo dozed in his car seat, exhausted from the cold and excitement. Mark hummed along to the Christmas music on the radio, one hand resting on my knee, his thumb tracing absent-minded circles. And Clara stared out the window, her profile sharp and thoughtful against the passing scenery. Her confession, "I miscalculated," seemed to hang in the heated air of the car, changing its chemical composition. The ghost was becoming human, and it was a more complicated transformation than I had ever anticipated. Back at the house, the festive energy shifted into the high gear of Christmas Eve preparation. While Mark rustled with assembling a last-minute, suspiciously complicated toy from Santa, I began the final preparations for the next day's feast. The kitchen was my domain, my sanctuary, and I moved through it with a sense of purpose, chopping vegetables for the stuffing, whipping cream for the pies, the radio playing softly. Clara lingered in the doorway for a moment before coming in. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked. It was a simple question, but from her, it felt monumental. I hesitated, a bunch of parsley in my hand. I could have said no, could have maintained the boundary, kept her as a guest in my world, but something had shifted on the ice, in the snowy street.
You could chop the onions and celery for the stuffing, I said, nodding towards the cutting board, if you don't mind. I can manage that, she said, and she rolled up the sleeves of her cashmere sweater, an oddly vulnerable gesture. She washed her hands meticulously and picked up the chef's knife I'd left for her. She held it with a strange formality, but her cuts were precise, economical. We worked in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the rhythmic chop of her knife and the hum of the refrigerator. It was the most domestic I had ever seen her, and it was strangely disarming. You have a very efficient technique, I remarked, trying to bridge the quiet. It's all about geometry, she said, not looking up from her task. Minimizing movement, maximizing output. Then she paused, looking at the pile of perfectly uniform celery pieces. It's how I was taught to approach everything. Even life? The question was out before I could stop it, softer than I had intended. She stopped chopping altogether, her shoulders tightening for a second before she relaxed them with a visible effort. Especially life. She looked at me then, her gaze clear and direct. I thought if you could design it perfectly, build it with the right materials, you could avoid mess. You could avoid the things that wobble and crack. Her eyes drifted towards the living room where Mark was now laughing, trying to decipher instructions written in what he called impossible to understand hieroglyphics. But life isn't a skyscraper. It's more like this. She gestured vaguely around my kitchen, at the bowl of rising dough, the scattered flour, the crayon drawing taped to the cabinet. It's organic. It's messy. And it's the mess that seems to give it its strength. I see that now. I stopped what I was doing, truly looking at her. The impeccable armor was gone. In its place was a woman, weary and wise, with a regret she was only just allowing herself to feel. The rivalry I had nurtured for years, the insecurity I had let fester, suddenly felt small and pointless. We weren't competitors. We were just two people who had loved the same man in completely different ways and had made completely different choices. Her choice had cost her him, and my choice had given me everything I had ever wanted. There was no battle to be won. The war was over, and it had been a phantom all along. It's a different kind of strength, Clara, I said gently. It's not better or worse. It's just different. She gave me a small, sad smile, the first genuine one I had ever seen from her. Perhaps. She finished chopping the last onion and scraped the perfect little cubes into the bowl I had set out for her. She washed her hands on a towel, her job complete. Thank you for letting me help, Sarah. And with that, she left the kitchen, leaving me alone with the simmering pots and the profound echo of her words. I stood there, my hands dusted with flour, and my heart aching with a strange, compassionate sorrow for the woman I had once seen as my enemy. The surprise of this Christmas was no longer just the baby or Clara's presence. It was the unexpected, quiet peace that was settling between us, a gift I never saw coming.
That evening, we carried out our Christmas Eve tradition of opening one gift each. The mood was lighter than it had been since Claire's arrival. Leo, of course, chose the largest, most suspiciously rattly box under the tree, which turned out to be a set of wooden instruments from his grandfather, resulting in an impromptu, cacophonous concert. Mark opened a new sweater from me, holding it up against his chest with a grin. My gift from him was a beautifully soft, oversized scarf, the exact color of a winter sky. It was cozy and warm, and I wrapped it around myself immediately, feeling cherished. Then it was Clara's turn. Mark handed her a small, neatly wrapped box. "This is from us," he said, his tone kind. She looked surprised, her carefully composed mask slipping for a moment. She untied the ribbon with deliberate slowness and opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver ornament, a little glass bird with a tiny bright red berry in its beak. It was simple, beautiful,
and utterly unlike the stark, modern aesthetic I associated with her. "It's a winter wren," I said, my voice a little tentative. "I saw it, and I thought of you." It was a lie and the truth all at once. I'd bought it days ago, before she'd even arrived, in a fit of pained generosity, an attempt to be the bigger person. Now, giving it to her felt different. It felt like an offering, a tiny token of the understanding we'd stumbled into. She held the ornament carefully, the glass catching the twinkling lights of the tree. She didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at it, her thumb stroking the delicate silver wing. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She quickly blinked them away, but the sheen remained. "Thank you," she said, her voice husky. It's perfect." She stood and walked to the tree, finding a bare spot near the front, and hung it with great care. The little bird swung gently, a fragile, beautiful addition to the chaotic, joyful collection. It was her first mark on this Christmas family, a small, accepted piece of her in our world. Later, after Leo was finally asleep, visions of sugar plums undoubtedly dancing in his head, and Mark had drifted off on the couch, exhausted from his toy assembly endeavors, I found myself alone in the living room, tidying up the discarded wrapping paper. Clara was still there, sitting in the armchair with a blanket over her legs, just looking at the tree. The house was quiet, save for the soft crackle of the fire. "He's a wonderful boy," she said softly, not turning to look at me. "He is," I agreed, sinking onto the couch opposite her. "He has his father's stubbornness, though." A faint smile touched her lips. "Yes, I remember that." She sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I was wrong, you know. That first night, when I said congratulations, I was startled, and if I'm being entirely honest, a little jealous. But not of you, not of the baby. I was jealous of him, of Mark. I was jealous that he got to have this whole messy, beautiful, expansive life, that he was brave enough to want it. After us." I didn't know what to say. I just listened, my heart a soft, aching drum in my chest. Our marriage was like a very beautiful, very expensive piece of art. It was impressive to look at. It was intellectually stimulating. But you couldn't live in it. You couldn't put your feet up on the furniture. There was no room for noise, for mess, for surprise. Her eyes drifted to the little glass bird on the tree. "We were a perfect concept. But you and he, you're a home. You built a home, and I was just too arrogant to see that a home was what he truly needed all along." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. I looked at this woman, so elegant and so sad, finally speaking the truth that had hung between us for years. All my defenses, all my insecurities crumbled to dust. There was no monster here, just a human being grappling with the path not taken. "You gave him other things, Clara. You gave him a part of his life that shaped who he is. I'm grateful for that." She looked at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time there was no barrier between us. No past, no husband, no competition. It was just two women in a quiet room on the eve of Christmas. "You're a better person than I gave you credit for, Sarah. He's lucky to have you." And as I sat there, wrapped in my new scarf, with my husband sleeping nearby, and my son dreaming upstairs, with a new life growing inside me and this unexpected peace settling over the house, I felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. The surprise of Clara's arrival had thrown me, but it had also forced a reckoning, a healing I didn't know I needed. I had thought her presence would be a shadow over my joy. Instead, it had become the contrast that made my joy shine all the brighter.
Christmas morning arrived in a blaze of golden light, reflecting off the snow and the unrestrained, seismic energy of a 5-year-old. Leo burst into our room at an ungodly hour, a whirlwind of flannel pajamas and explosive excitement, launching himself onto the bed. "He came! Santa came!" he yelled, his small body practically vibrating. Mark groaned, laughing, and pulled him into a hug, and I watched them, my heart so full I thought it might simply dissolve into light. This was it. This was the epicenter of my world. As we shuffled out into the living room, where the tree lights glowed against the dawn, I saw that Clara was already there, dressed and sitting quietly on the sofa with a cup of coffee, as if she wanted to be a witness to the spectacle, to absorb it all. The next hour was a beautiful, paper-tearing, ribbon-flying chaos. Leo's joy was a physical force, filling every corner of the room. He marveled at every toy, every book, every pair of socks as if it were a treasure beyond compare. Mark and I exchanged our gifts, a new watch for him, a locket with a picture of Leo for me, and the air was thick with love and the scent of pine. Through it all, I held my own secret, the final one, close. I waited for the perfect moment as the initial storm of excitement began to ebb, and Leo was deeply engrossed in assembling a Lego spaceship. I caught Mark's eye and gave a small, deliberate nod towards the tree. His brow furrowed in confusion for a second, and then understanding dawned, his face breaking into that same wondrous smile from 2 nights before. He reached under the tree and pulled out the small, flat box I had pointed out to him earlier, the one with the tag that read, "To Leo, love Santa." "Leo, buddy," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think Santa left one more for you." Leo looked up, intrigued, and scrambled over. He tore open the paper with less ferocity this time, revealing a simple white box. He lifted the lid, and his little face scrunched up in confusion. He pulled out the tiny red and green onesie. He held it up, turning it this way and that, reading the words printed on the front. "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night." He looked at Mark. He looked at me. "It's for a baby," he stated, his tone one of pure, logical deduction. "That's right, sweetie," I said softly, my voice trembling. I knelt down in front of him, taking his small hands in mine. "Mommy has a baby in her tummy. You're gonna be a big brother." The processing that happened on his face was a sight to behold. Confusion, then dawning comprehension, then a slow, spreading awe that transformed his entire being. His eyes widened, his mouth forming a perfect O. He dropped the onesie and threw himself around my neck, squeezing so tightly I could barely breathe. "A baby!" he screamed, right into my ear, but I didn't care. "A real one! That's the best present in the whole world!" He then launched himself at Mark, who caught him, his own eyes shining, and the 3 of us collapsed into a laughing, crying, tangled heap on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of Christmas morning. When we finally untangled ourselves, breathless and happy, I looked over at Clara. She was still sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, but she was smiling. It wasn't her polite, practiced smile. It was a real, gentle, albeit sad curve of her lips, and she was crying, silent tears tracing clean paths down her cheeks. She wasn't crying for herself, I realized in that moment.
She was crying for the sheer, unadulterated beauty of it. She was witnessing a kind of magic her blueprints could never have accounted for. A joy so pure and messy and perfect, it could break your heart and put it back together again all at once. She caught my eye, and she didn't look away. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, of blessing. In that shared look, the last of the walls between us turned to dust, blown away by the hurricane of joy that was my son and the quiet, steady promise of the child to come.
The rest of Christmas morning passed in a warm, hazy glow. The initial explosion of joy settled into a deep, thrumming contentment that filled the house like the rich aroma of the turkey now slowly roasting in the oven. Leo would periodically stop whatever he was doing, walk over to me, and very solemnly pat my stomach. "Hello in there," he'd whisper, before resuming his mission to build the tallest Lego tower known to man. Mark's gaze kept finding mine, his eyes saying everything words couldn't. The love, the awe, the profound gratitude for this second chance at the family he had always, secretly, wanted. Clara helped me set the table for dinner. It was a wordless, efficient collaboration. She'd lay a placemat, and I'd set the plate. She'd place the silverware with geometric precision, and I'd follow with the wine glasses, filling hers and Mark's with a deep red and mine with more sparkling cider. We didn't need to speak. The rhythm of the work was its own language. When we were finished, the table looked beautiful. A blend of my homey touches and her innate sense of order. It was, I thought, a perfect metaphor for the day itself. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long blue shadows across the snow, Mark built up the fire and we all gathered in the living room, full and sleepy from the feast. Leo was curled up with his new stuffed dog, his eyelids heavy. I was nestled into the corner of the couch, Mark's arm around me, my head on his shoulder. It was in this quiet, post-feast lull that Clara, sitting in her usual armchair, broke the comfortable silence. "There's a reason I came back this year," she began, her voice quiet but clear in the firelit room. "Beyond the project falling through." She was looking into the flames, her profile etched in gold. "I've been offered a permanent position in Tokyo. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'll be leaving right after the new year." The announcement landed, but it didn't shatter the peace. It simply was a fact. Mark shifted beside me. "Tokyo, Clara, that's incredible. Congratulations." She nodded, still watching the fire. "Thank you. It is." She finally turned her gaze to us, to our little family unit curled up on the sofa. "But I needed to come here first. I needed to see this." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the room, the sleeping child, the two of us wrapped around each other. "I think I needed to close the circle, to see that the life I left behind wasn't broken. It was just remade into something better, something sturdier." She looked directly at me. "You asked me to stay for skating, Sarah. You gave me that ornament. You let me chop the onions." Her lips quirked into a faint, genuine smile. "You didn't have to do any of that. I wouldn't have in your position. Thank you for your kindness. It was the final piece I needed." I understood then. Her visit wasn't an intrusion. It was a pilgrimage. She hadn't come to reclaim her past. She had come to understand it, to make peace with it, so she could finally, truly let it go and move forward into her future, unburdened. "We're happy for you, Clara," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Truly. She smiled, a real, warm, unguarded smile that transformed her face, making her look younger, lighter. "I know you are." She stood up, smoothing her trousers.
And now I think I will take a walk, get some air. It's a beautiful night. She slipped out the front door, leaving Mark and I alone in the flickering quiet. He tightened his arm around me, pressing a kiss to my hair. "Well," he murmured, his voice full of emotion, "that was not the Christmas I was expecting." I leaned into him, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart against my cheek. I looked around the room, at the glittering tree, at our son sleeping peacefully, at the little glass bird Clara had hung, and at the empty chair where she had just been. The ghost was gone, not banished, but laid to rest, and in her place was a memory, a complicated human and ultimately peaceful one. "It was the Christmas we needed," I whispered back, and it was. His surprise had forced a confrontation. My surprise had anchored our future, and in the turbulent, emotional space between them, we had all found a strange and beautiful kind of grace. The house felt different now. It didn't just smell of pine and gingerbread. It smelled of peace. It felt, for the first time, completely and unquestionably like mine, like ours.
There are moments in life that feel like a full stop, a chapter closing with such finality that you can almost hear the soft, decisive thud of the book. Clara's departure the next morning was one of those moments. There were no long, drawn-out goodbyes, no tearful embraces. It was clean and quiet and right. She came downstairs with her single, elegant suitcase, looking every bit the global architect ready for her next project. But the sharp edges I had always associated with her seemed softer somehow, as if the emotional humidity of our Christmas had sanded them down. Leo, still buzzing from the residual Christmas magic and the earth-shattering news of his impending promotion to Big Brother, gave her a spontaneous, sticky hug around the legs. "Bye, Aunt Clara. Are you going to build a skyscraper?" She looked down at him, and for a second I saw a flicker of the same wistfulness from the ice rink. "Something like that, Leo," she said, her voice gentle. She then turned to Mark, and they shared a look that was devoid of the complicated history that had once charged the air between them. It was just two people, wishing each other well. "Safe travels, Clara," Mark said, pulling her into a brief, firm hug. "Send us pictures of Tokyo." "I will," she replied. Then she turned to me. We stood for a moment in the quiet of the foyer, the morning light streaming through the glass door. There was so much that could have been said, but all of it had already been communicated in the kitchen, by the tree, in the firelight. The words would have been redundant. Instead, she simply reached out and squeezed my hand. "Take care of them, Sarah," she said softly. And in that simple sentence, I heard it all. Her blessing, her surrender, her acknowledgement that this was where he belonged, that this was his world to be taken care of. "I will," I promised, my throat tight. And with a final, small smile, she was gone. The door closed behind her with a whisper, not a slam. The house seemed to let out a collective breath it had been holding for years. The silence that followed was not empty. It was spacious and warm and full of possibility. Mark slipped his arm around my waist, pulling me close, and we stood there for a long time, just listening to the quiet, to the sound of Leo humming to himself in the living room, to the steady, comforting rhythm of our own breathing. Later that day, as I was putting away the last of the Christmas dishes, my hand brushed against the little glass bird ornament Clara had left on the tree. I took it down, its delicate weight a surprise in my palm. I didn't put it away with the other decorations. Instead, I walked to the large window in the living room, the one that looked out onto the bare-limbed trees and the white expanse of the backyard. I found a small suction cup hook and placed it right in the center of the glass. I hung the bird there, so it appeared to be perched in the midst of the winter landscape. It wasn't a reminder of her, not really. It was a reminder of the Christmas we found peace. A reminder that sometimes
The greatest surprises aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that arrive unbidden, challenging us, breaking us open, and ultimately making us whole. Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around me, his hands coming to rest over mine on my stomach. We stood there together, watching the little glass bird, a tiny, brave spot of beauty against the vast white world. The past was finally, completely at rest, and the future, our beautiful, messy, expanding future, was just beginning.